everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to share with you 3 romance books that I read recently in the hope that maybe they might tickle your fancy. At the time of filming this, it is the 13th of February, so obviously Valentine's Day is actually going to be tomorrow for me, though probably not by the time that this video gets uploaded because I am not that organised and not that speedy at editing, to be honest. But maybe Valentine's Day put you in the mood to read some fun romances. I don't know why it is that it's taken me so long to realise how much of a romance fan I am. I feel like for a lot of people there's like a lot of misogyny surrounding romance, it being seen as like a lesser genre, and why on earth would you admit that you like to read romance books? Like, that's never really been a thing for me. But it's just weird because like I know that I love romantic comedy films. Whenever there is a romance plot within a book or a film that isn't typically very romance heavy, I'm like, hello. This isn't going to win me any fans, but I remember watching Star Wars for the first time, a film series which I have seen 2.5 films of, the original series of course. And to be honest with you, the first film just kind of washed over me. I didn't really get what was going on, I wasn't really into it, but the second film came around and Han and Leia started making eyes at each other and suddenly I was like, okay, I'm invested now, I'm engaged. Not necessarily a thing I should be proud of, but that's who I am, it's who I am. I like a bit of romance in my books, so why was I not just reading the genre itself? Pretty much this time last year I came across the Heaving Bosoms podcast, which is a podcast entirely dedicated to reading and spoiling romance books. They basically take a book each week and go through the entire plot synopsis of the book and just have a really fun time like giggling their way through it. And I found the podcast so charming and I enjoyed it so much. I think I've listened back to it I think 3 times, which considering there's almost 300 episodes, no mean feat. I think it just encouraged me to read a little bit more romance. I just enjoy it. So we're going to talk about some of these today. I have this year read a couple of romance books that, to be honest with you, kind of duds for me. I didn't really enjoy them. So this is not to say that I enjoy every romance book that I end up reading. The ones I would actively recommend to people. And so today we've got a very, very pink theme going on here. And I think if you have watched like Book Talk or if you are at all into romance books, you will definitely have heard of these. We have Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma, Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, and Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina. Dating Dr. Dill I read back in, I think it was the end of November, beginning of December. And this begins Nisha Sharma's modern Shakespeare romance retellings, with the plot of this being very, very loosely based on The Taming of the Shrew, which is a Shakespeare play that I have such a fascination with. And so I'm always really intrigued when people try to do modern retellings of it. Like 10 Things I Hate About You is one of my favourite films of all time. I love when people play with this story, and particularly how people try to riddle out subverting the problematic aspects of Taming of the Shrew. So in this we have the 2 main characters, Karina and Prem. Karina, who wakes up on her 30th birthday expecting her family to be making a big fuss over her, and discovers that this is not the case. She comes downstairs and just has a radio silence from her family. Now, her family not really paying as much attention to her as her younger sister is something that she is fairly familiar with. However, you know, on her birthday it really hurts, and her birthday just goes from bad to worse. Not only have her family forgotten her birthday, but her father reveals that he is planning on selling the family home, which is absolutely devastating to Karina because this was the home that she really wanted to buy herself to be able to preserve for her future family. But because Karina is unmarried, her father is kind of dismissive of her, and we're just getting to see like how much disdain is layered onto Karina for the fact that she is the older sister and yet her younger sister is getting married and she remains single. She eventually makes her father agree to an ultimatum. Karina has to be engaged within 4 months, otherwise her father will go ahead with selling the house. And so Karina has now made it her mission to be engaged. She plans on going out to a bar with her friends and she comes across this very, very handsome man who she is instantly attracted to. They almost end up spending the night together, but then he rushes off unexpectedly. The next day she is called by her younger sister, who is a social media influencer, to take her to a talk show where she is going to be meeting Dr. Dill, a famous heart surgeon who now hosts the Dr. Dill show, where he talks about ways of improving your cardiovascular health, particularly his assertion that love is bad for you, if it even exists at all, that it causes undue stress. When Karina gets to the TV studio, very hungover and very upset, she realises that this Dr. Dill is actually the man that she'd been making out with the night before, whose real name is Dr. Prem Varma. And oh, how she loses it. She basically very publicly rips into him, screaming at him about what a hypocrite he is, how he played her, and this ends up going viral, which obviously is embarrassing for Karina, but is actually detrimental to Prem because now he has sponsors pulling out of his show. A day or so goes by, the two of them are still fuming about this, but then Karina and Prem end up getting invitations by Karina's aunties, who reveal that they have come up with a plan that might solve both of their problems. Karina and Prem should start fake dating, in the hopes that this will get Prem's sponsors back on side, which he desperately needs in order to carry out important work, and Karina can kind of get her family off her back. And they reluctantly agree to go along with this, but with Karina adamant that she is going to stick to her plan of dating around and trying to find somebody to marry her. Because of course a relationship with Dr. Dill should never be able to work because they hate each other, right? I had a very good time with this one. I really enjoyed seeing how Taming of the Shrew was kind of weaved into this story. I will admit though, there are a lot of aspects of this where the book is just coincidence city, and you have to be able to go on board with the amount of times that characters are just thrown into situations predicated entirely on coincidence. Like, of course the man that Karina was kissing the night before had to be the talk show host. Of course! Also, I know when there's like enemies or rivals to lovers romance to expect that at the beginning the relationship between the main couple is not going to be entirely amicable, but there was a level of like screaming at each other and calling each other names that, to be honest, only really starts to make sense when you realise that it is Taming of the Shrew that this book is adapting. There was just like a level of vitriol and bile being thrown at each other that I just wouldn't have been able to condone in any other situation, but here I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. I did really enjoy, however, this main theme within this book of showing love versus saying it. Prem is so adamant that love doesn't exist and that it is dangerous to say I love you, whereas Karina, who is kind of like affection starved, I think she's a bit of a words of affirmation girl. She needs to hear those words and how important it is to kind of, as a couple, meet each other where you are and understand what another person needs out of their relationship. But yeah, overall I thought this was really sweet. I thought it was fun. I'm definitely looking forward to the next book that comes out in this Shakespeare retelling series. Next up we have Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. In this we've got the main character of Hazel, who I don't know if I want to call her a manic pixie dream girl. I think she has a bit more depth and a bit more nuance than that, but she is kind of on that level. Like, imagine Jess from New Girl, but like probably like 3 times more intense. And that's a lot, that's a lot. She's quite an absurd character. She's very bubbly, very outgoing, and very out there in a way that can often rub people up the wrong way. However, she is also a very lovable character and very confident in herself. She is somebody who knows that she is weird and also knows that she's not going to accept anybody in her life who doesn't also like love her for all her weirdness. She has experience of people trying to tame her and trying to tone her down, as does her mother, and she's adamant that she will not be in a relationship with anybody who does that. Her fun, quirky personality makes her perfect in her job as a primary school teacher, and when we meet Hazel, she has just been offered a role at a new school. The head teacher is actually her best friend's husband, and she goes to a party at their house where all the teachers are going to be meeting up, and she bumps into Josh Im, who Hazel had actually known at college and had made a complete fool of herself many times in front of. They didn't really know each other very well, but they were kind of acquaintances. And what Hazel hasn't known up until this point is that Josh is actually her best friend's brother. She just never made that connection to Josh because her best friend Em changed her name when she got married. And Hazel, especially finding out that Josh lives so close to her, basically gloms onto him and declares at the party that they are going to be best friends, whether he likes it or not. Josh is quite straight-laced. You know, he is a bit of a normal, but he is quite charmed by Hazel. He knows her personality, he knows what she's like, even though he hasn't had a lot of like one-to-one interactions with her. And he's just kind of like her new reluctant best friend. Especially after Hazel's flat ends up flooding, Em kind of forces Josh into letting Hazel live with him for a few weeks. We got a bit of forced proximity here. And the more they get to know each other, the more they like each other. And maybe there might even be some romantic feelings bubbling under the surface. But of course we can't have that. That will ruin their best friendship. And so they decide to kind of put away their feelings for each other and instead set each other up on different dates. But once again, the more they're getting to know each other, the more they're liking each other, and the more they are realising that maybe they are each other's perfect person. Once again, this was another very, very fun read. I'll be honest with you, it's probably not my favourite. I really enjoyed the relationship between Josh and Hazel. I love any scene where they're together. I think for me, I just really need my supporting characters, like the best friends, to be a little bit more dynamic and a bit more involved. And there are also definitely aspects of Hazel as a character where I'm just kind of like, okay, I guess you're doing this. Oh, Hazel, why are you doing this? She will just blurt out things at completely inappropriate moments. And I feel like if I was her friend, I'd be like, Hazel, what are you doing? But it is a very sweet relationship. They do bounce off of each other very, very well. This is the second Christina Lauren book that I've read after The Unhoneymooners, and I'm definitely up for reading more of their work. And then finally, I did save the best till last. I read Josh and Hazel and this book on the same weekend. It was the weekend after I'd done Evita, and I realised that I had nothing on, and I needed that kind of weekend, a nothing weekend, a potato weekend, where I just sit on the sofa for 2 days straight, just reading. No commitments, nowhere to be. It was beautiful. And I have to say that the very satisfied feeling that I have was amplified by the fact that I read Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. You definitely know the name Ali Hazelwood. She's probably most well known for writing The Love Hypothesis, which is a very, very Marmite book. Some people love it, some people hate it. I definitely really loved it when I read it. I understand why some things kind of icked out other people. It just didn't for me. And I will say, before we say anything else about this book, I think if you didn't like The Love Hypothesis, you'll probably not like this. If you loved it like I did, this will be right up your street. I feel like if my cynicism dial was turned up like a notch or two, then I probably would have been really annoyed by this. There were a lot of times reading this where kind of my spidey senses would tingle and I'd be like, oh, I bet a lot of people dislike this moment. Or like, oh, I would hate this if I was a slightly different human. But actually, I found this really, really delightful, and I just had a big smile plastered all over my face whilst I read it. So in this, we've got the main character of Dr. B. Koningvasa, who works on neuroengineering and has recently got a job at NASA. And she is incredibly excited about this opportunity until she finds out who her co-head of this project is going to be, Levi Ward, who she had previously come across at grad school and seemed to just absolutely despise her, but she didn't know why. And so she is kind of bracing herself for the worst, that she's going to have a horrible experience working with this man. But when she actually gets to NASA, it seems like he is being a lot more attentive, backing her up when colleagues are being cruel to her, and his behaviour is going completely against her notions of him that developed during grad school. And she just can't really believe it. She doesn't really know what his game is. Of course, as they start to spend more time with each other, as they start working more on the project, they're getting more insight into each other and particularly how much their interests match. And through the course of the story, we are learning a little bit more about like what was going on in the past few years. These different bits of information start to be unfurled. And once again, could these two have feelings for each other? Will they be able to make things work? Who knows? I really, really enjoyed this central relationship. And it did seem like a genuine mystery as to why it was that Levi had behaved the way that he did in years past, why he was behaving the way that he is now. Though it is very, very clear from the get-go that he does like B, but B is so like closed off to this whole idea, whereas I'm kind of there like screaming at her, it's because he likes you, you idiot. And she just doesn't get it. She's just like, wow, Levi did a nice thing. It's weird considering how much he hates me. I'm like, he doesn't. He really, really doesn't. He is showing you that he doesn't hate you. But of course, that is all part of the fun. I will say the main character's dialogue especially is very internet-y, I want to say. That's the only way I can describe it. In a way that I think just kind of veer into like slightly cringy territory. There are certain characters in here, and it isn't across the board. Like Levi doesn't speak this way, but they talk in a way that feels very much like somebody just swallowed Twitter. In a way that like I see people on social media talking this way, but I never hear people speak like this in real life. Though it is in both the dialogue and the first person narration, so at least it is consistent. And as I say, not every character speaks in this kind of internet-y way, like Levi doesn't, so it's clearly a character choice on the author's part. The plot in terms of romance is definitely quite predictable. You know that he's in love with her pretty much from the get-go. There's a whole plot point where both of them seem to think that the other one is married, which is clearly not true. And you know that eventually that has to get resolved, as well as a couple of other big reveals that have to come. And you spend most of this book kind of questioning how a character who is so like book smart, so science smart, can be so stupid. I think I actually made this comparison when I was talking about the love hypothesis, but it holds true here. It is like the song Stupid with Love from Mean Girls. Smart with science, but stupid with love. Something I wasn't expecting from this book is that it does actually deal quite a lot with grief, not only for people lost, but also relationships lost, in a way that it does make sense why B's defences are up and why she's quite distrustful of Levi to begin with. This is a book that relies very much on misunderstanding, both on Levi's part and also on B's. And I think you can see from the get-go what these misunderstandings are going to be, but it at the same time is still very enjoyable and you are just waiting for them to realise and for the shoe to drop. As I say, like with the love hypothesis, I can definitely see people finding this a little bit cringy because of the fact that it is very predictable. I saw people saying that the characters are very similar and the plot is very similar to the love hypothesis. I don't really think that's true at all, but there are definitely aspects of this that I can see people rolling their eyes at. But for me, all of those little bits just didn't bother me. They just washed over me and I was just having such a good time. I didn't care. I was just along for this ride. I was giggling at parts of this book. There is a climactic scene at the end of this book that I did not see coming. I didn't know where it was going to go and I actually gasped. And I hardly ever like very physically react to a book in that kind of way, where I'm like laughing one minute, gasping the other, screaming, "He loves you, you idiot!" And I think after quite a few tiring weeks of my life, this was just what I needed. I needed this book. But it's just joyful, it's just fun, and it's what I needed. So in terms of how these different books rank for me, I think in terms of my personal enjoyment and preferences, I would go Josh and Hazel third, then Dating Dr. Dill second, even though I did have some issues with the screaming, I did still have fun with this book, and then Love on the Brain up top for me. But I generally had a very good time with these books, and I would be very keen to hear any romance books that you've read. Typically I like contemporary romance and historical romance. I'm not really much for fantasy romance. You know, what have you been reading this February? I would very much like to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye!